Cornell Cooperative Extension. We're just going to wait a minute or two because a lot of people are signing on. But tonight's course, this is part of our Rooted and Resilient series, Homesteading Skills for Beginners. This one is honeybees and beekeeping. So we're going to spend an hour talking about honeybees and beekeeping. For questions, it would be best if you could use the chat. Jen is monitoring the chat, and she will break in if it's an urgent question. If it's not an urgent question, we'll address those at the end. We'll have plenty of, we'll go for a full hour. I have a lot to cover. I had to cut some back, but we will have time, and I'll stay on as long as we need it for questions. And I'm going to begin. So a lot of beekeepers talk about, they start talking about beekeeping, they talk about their beekeeping journey. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I've been keeping bees for 35 years or so. I developed an interest when I was in high school. And at that time in the 80s, beekeeping was an unusual pastime associated with unusual people. That's changed. We'll talk a little bit about the change. But the two formative beekeepers in my past are, first of all, the man on the right is a man named Myron Cermak. He's he's passed on now. He was an elderly Ukrainian immigrant who came to this country about 1910 or so, worked in the coal fields of Pennsylvania, saved up enough money, bought a storefront on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and had a Ukrainian store that that ran for many years. In fact, it was run by his descendants and only closed a couple of years ago. But Myron was a passionate beekeeper. He followed a folkloric tradition that was heavily based in Ukrainian culture. The instrument he's there is a bandura. He would play the bandura to his bees at certain times when he harvested the honey at the beginning of the spring, a wake-up call or song. And really talked about the bees as if they were, the hives were individuals and they had individual personalities, which I've come to understand over time is true. And hives have individual personalities, which you will get to know as you keep bees. The man on the left is actually a very famous beekeeper. His name's Charlie Mraz. He was from Middlebury, Vermont. He was a major commercial beekeeper in northern New England. He was also a proponent of bee venom therapy. Hence, he's stripped to the waist, which is he always kept bees. He always did his bee work, stripped to the waist with no protective equipment whatsoever, because he believed in the healthful effect of bee stings. When I told my friends that I was keeping bees, they looked at me as if I was going to be a snake handler in a church or something. And they actually quoted or mentioned this portrait. It's a very famous portrait by Richard Avedon, the photographer of a beekeeper out west. You could be like that guy in the Avedon portrait. But no, my interests were much more based in the bee biology and the life of the bee, and secondarily in honey and producing honey. So we're going to talk about the biology of the bee who are in the hive. We're going to go through the cycle of the seasons with bees and talk about beekeeping and the products of the hive this evening. So Apis mellifera is our European honeybee. Apis mellifera is a immigrant, like most of us, to North America. Successfully an immigrant across most of the temperate regions of the world, present on every continent now except for Antarctica. Like people and like dogs and other animals, bees have races that have individual characteristics. And Italian honeybees were the classic honeybees of beekeeping in the days of yore because they're a relatively calm bee and produce a lot of honey. Since then, other bees have been introduced: Carniolan, Caucasian, Russian bees. Each of them have their own characteristics in terms of producing honey, fighting off pests, and disease resistant. But what does happen with bees, what's very important, particularly for new beekeepers, is to understand that bees tend to adapt to local conditions. So bees that are raised here over successive generations, particularly in places like our own, the Mohawk Valley in upstate New York, adapt themselves and become more winter hardy, get used to producing honey in a shorter window of nectar, and also adapt to fighting off pests that are endemic to this region. So that's been something that's very important to survival because bees have been very stressed population-wise. both in the past and in the present. And one thing that I have to mention is that bee populations this past winter, beekeepers always look at winter survival. When I first started, winter survival was, 80% survival was a bad year, 90% to 95% was typical. This and the last couple of years, I had 100% survival. This year, I only have a few hives. I only went into the winter with 6 hives. I only have one survivor. Nationwide, that has been a trend. We don't know why that is at this point. And more distressing is that the USDA honeybee lab has experienced cuts to their scientific staff and their beekeeping staff. So that are going along with the rest of the cuts. So that's a problem for us nationwide. So who's in the hive? We always think about the queen. There's one queen per hive, and she lays all the eggs, so she's the mother of them all. So she's very important, not just in reproduction, but she's the one who carries the genetics. So it's very important to think about when you buy bees, what the queen stock is even more than the workers, because the workers will be there for a generation or so, a few weeks in the summer. The queen is going to set the tone for the growth and development of the hive over a year, 2 years, sometimes even 3 years. So she lays all the eggs. She can select the sex of the bee as she's laying them. And there are different size cells in the honeycomb for drone bees, male bees, and for worker bees, which are female bees that are undeveloped sexually, so they can't reproduce like the queen. They meet once, and they gather enough sperm from several drones that they carry through their entire reproductive life with that one mating. Important in terms of beekeeping is through the entirety of her reign in the hive, she exudes a pheromone or scent that is called queenrite by beekeepers. And that's something that communicates to all the bees in the hive that, that everything's okay and that they have a queen and she's laying eggs. When she gets weak and older, she will stop exuding the queenrite scent and the bees will supersede her. They will replace her with another bee. So another queen bee. That can be good and often happens without you even knowing, but it can also cause problems, which we'll discuss later on. So the workers are really the body of the bees in the hive. An average hive, a small hive is 10,000, a big hive can be 50,000 or even more worker bees. Their bodies develop completely different than queens. They have completely developed wings and honey gathering materials. They have wax glands, and they also, as workers, they perform different roles through the course of their lives. As they emerge from their cells, they will start tasks in the hive. So there will be nurse bees, and they will be guard bees. Eventually, in the course of the summer, they will go out and become forager bees. And when they become forager bees, they have a relatively short life because the mortality of a bee, a worker bee, is about 10% of all the bees that leave the hive in the morning don't come back. So the queen has to be busy laying eggs and hatching up a new generation. In the winter, when they are bound in the hive, they can last as long as 6 months. But in flight and in work, 6 weeks is a long time for a worker bee. They literally work until their wings fall off. Drones are the male bees. They should be no more than 5% or so of the population. They exist for one thing. They carry the genetic material to mate with a young queen to pass on that generation. They don't have any body parts that can help work. They can't, or behavioral abilities. They can't gather food. They can't process honey. They can't make wax or build wax. They just kind of exist. And their body reflects their role. You see their tail end is blunt because it has no stinger, and their head is quite large with a big, large eyes because they need to mate with the queen when she's in flight. and they need to be able to see that. I'm going to try to do something, oops, here. See if I can do it. So this is a YouTube video, and this is the end of the season. And this is, if you can see the bees, they're struggling at the entrance there. There you go. That's a drone bee. At the end of the season, the worker bees throw the drone bees out because they don't contribute and they don't want to feed them all winter long. So they're kind of like drunks at the bar, and they get thrown out, and they will also sometimes they pick them up physically like bouncers and fly them out 20 or 30 feet away and drop them in the grass. And the drones will come back and try to go in. And at the end of the day, when the bees are going into the hive, you sometimes find them at the corner there, like looking sadly at the worker bees going in and out. But their necessity is ended for the season, and they are thrown out. So let's see.
So Garrett, we couldn't see any video on our end.
Oh, you couldn't? Okay, so I'm
No.
not going to do this video then because we run a short time. There was another one. I'll pass by that.
We'll
Bees.
be able to share that link when we share this presentation.
Yeah, so the presentation will be shared in
Yeah.
its entirety, and you can see the link and go and I recommend you kind of go and pick up. It's amusing. So honeybee architecture, where do they like to live? You know, those hives on the right are in front of my house. That's what we put them in. But hives, bees naturally like to be in somewhat of a different structure. Even though this hive, the standard beehive, has been in place for 200 years or so, bees have a different preference. And that's why when you find them in houses, they're often up. They like an elevated location about 6 or 20 feet above the ground. They build in cavities with volumes of between 2 and 20 gallons. So like stud bays and houses are really a natural attractant to bees because it's a perfect location. They can be up, they can be in a place with a sufficient volume. They like downward facing entrances that face south or face towards a sunny spot because that gives them warmth and controls moisture. When they swarm and fly away, they want to be at least 1,000 feet away from a parent colony. Whereas in our apiaries, you can see we put them right next to one another. So we're a little bit forcing them into an artificial environment, which can cause problems with swarming and other things. Bees like to go into a space that has previously hosted bees. So when we start an apiary or beehive, we often recommend that you put a comb or two of drawn honeycomb into the hive so that they can smell the wax and the leftover honey. So it tells them that someone's been there before and has lived there, and that's a good thing, rather than a purely new hive. So if you're starting from scratch, you might want to see with a beekeeper if you can borrow a comb of drawn honey to put them in. Oftentimes in nature, nesting sites can be used and tend to be in use for many years. They over and over, generations of bees go back there. I talk to old farm families who say, well, we have a bee tree. It's in the corner of the yard. The bee's been there as long as we can remember. I participated once in removing a colony of bees from a barn that was going to be torn down because of a road widening project. And that family remembered those bees and someone had written about those bees over 150 years prior to us removing them and the barn being taken down. And that's just part of, where we are today. So internally to the hive, the bees build honeycomb. The worker bees exude that wax from their glands. The cells are all uniform within the comb and are hexagonal. Honeycomb's used for a number of different purposes to raise worker and drone brood. The drone's combs are actually a little bit wider. That's the only difference. Interiors of hive naturally have 4 to 6 combs generally, and human-made hives tend to have 8 to 10 combs. So again, we're differing a little bit from nature, and that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes the bees won't move out entirely in the interior of a hive, and it's often because they have that natural inclination to have a tighter cluster. In the hive, the comb is organized from the inside out. The inside is where the body of bee activity takes place. So that's where the eggs are laid, the young are reared, the winter cluster is there, and the outer combs become for food storage, both honey and pollen. And finally, comb cells are created with a slight upward angle so that the honey stays in there, stays contained, won't leak out if it gets too warm. So what we know of bees is they're very important pollinators. They are, in fact, the most efficient pollinators of all the animal insect species. Many other bees pollinate. There are a lot of wild pollinators that are very important, solitary bees, bumblebees, even birds and sometimes bats pollinate. But bees are specifically, they're designed to pollinate. They have long tongues. You can see on this bee, this was on a zinnia in front of my house. She can reach deep into the flower to pull out the nectar. They also have pollen baskets and hair on their bodies that can carry pollen back to the hive. And they do something which is they exhibit both species and area fidelity. So when they detect something that flowers and blossoms that they want to draw from, they will utilize that source exclusive almost to all others. So when the bee comes back, we'll talk a little about the bee dance in a moment. The worker bees tell each other, this is the place, this is the best source, and they will go to that one source, that one until it is exhausted, and then they will move on to another. Which sometimes causes frustration to farmers. So, for example, I had somebody had a few apple trees and put some beehives in amongst the apple trees, and the bees weren't going to apple blossoms because they were working the dandelions. Dandelions are a very attractive flower to bees. They're first really in the spring that are a big source of nectar and pollen. So it took them a few days or even a week to catch on to the apple blossoms. Eventually they did, but it's important to remember that they are working their own schedule, not human schedules. Some crops that we depend upon have co-evolved with bees and depend upon honeybees particularly for pollination and therefore for production of fruit and nuts. So for example, almonds, every year in February, so just last month, millions, literally millions of colonies of bees from across the United States travel to California to pollinate almond crops. And then they travel back to Florida for orange blossoms or go the blossom trail up and perhaps end up in Maine pollinating blueberries. Apples are highly dependent upon pollination. If you're getting an apple that's lopsided, one side is fully round and the other side is kind of flat, that's because it wasn't fully pollinated by a bee. She didn't hit all of the elements of the flower, and those parts that she didn't hit and cross-pollinate didn't develop. So it's very important for the apple industry to have a good stock of pollinations. Here you see a close-up of a bee, and you can see that she's carrying pollen in her pollen basket, which is a structure in her exoskeleton of her leg, and she's also carrying pollen on her body, on the hairs of her body. And when she's in a flower, that pollen reaches the interior of the flower through both means, that basket of pollen, also through the pollen that's generally on her body. So how much honey does one worker bee produce in her lifetime? We don't have time to do the test, but this is 1/12 of a teaspoon per bee. And your average, a good return on a year in a single hive is a minimum of 75 pounds of honey in this year. So think of how many teaspoons are in 75 pounds of honey, which is, I think, about, 8 or 10 gallons. It's a lot of bee life. The bees are giving up their life for this. So they collect nectar in their crop, which is a specialized part of their digestive system. And when they fly, it's equal to about 50% of their body weight. And they visit about 1,000 individual blossoms to fill their crop before they return back to the hive in a single flight. When they get back there, The nectar is about 70 to 80% water, which needs to be reduced by the bees in the hive to less than 18%. If it's greater than 18%, and the greater it is, the more unstable it is, it will ferment and go bad. Below 18%, it's extremely stable over time and can actually be stored for decades or more because it's a pure sugar. And actually, when microorganisms like bacteria or viruses land on honey, full strength honey, it desiccates them. It draws the water out of them. So it's important that when you harvest honey, you get a sense of the moisture content. And you can tell that by capped honey is generally fully reduced. Uncapped honey is less than fully produced, so you don't want to spin out uncapped honey. And then they produce the honey in the hive by the workers pass it back and forth between themselves at their mouth parts. They fan, and through their process of taking it in and out, they add enzymes and proteins. So honey is a very interesting substance. You can become a honey sommelier if you want to go take the training. You have to go to Italy. It sounds like a great vacation to me. Spend, I think it's a 2-week course in Italy, tasting honey and wine, and become a honey sommelier. But you can have varietal honeys. It's difficult in this area, but places where you have a very short, distinct growing season, like Florida with orange blossoms, you can put the hive in amongst those orange trees and get orange blossom honey. In this area, basswood, locust, and clover are possible varietals. I've tried to get basswood's one of the best. It's a very light, they call it water white honey, very high value. There are some locust groves around here, but it has a very short blossom season in June, and it's easily disrupted by wet weather. So you have to have exactly the right combination of the blossoms coming in and the bees being available, and you transport them, and you have to draw off the honey very quickly because the bees will mix it and you'll lose that varietal nature. Therefore, in our part of the world, the most common type of honey is wildflower, which means whatever the bees brought in. You can generally separate it by spring and fall, and kind of like maple syrup, spring is lighter in color and lighter in flavor, and fall is darker in color and darker in flavor. There are some emerging honeys that are coming from actually some of our invasive species. We in this area are very familiar with Japanese knotweed, which in August puts out a little white stamen with flowers. And actually, although knotweed is a tremendous problem in terms of managing an environment, it does produce a very beautiful honey, as does purple loosestrife, which grows in areas along highways and things. But generally, we're dealing with wildflower here mostly. So the other thing that bees produce is pollen, and pollen is often called bee bread because they mix it with honey to make a separate substance that they store in the honeycomb. Honey is their carbohydrate. Pollen is their protein and fat in terms of their diet. But it also contains other enzymes, minerals, and vitamins that are important to them. It's also used by many people as a health food. And if you're interested in gathering pollen, there's a small device that fits on your entrance to your hive that essentially makes them go through a screen. And as they walk through the screen, it brushes the pollen off of their pollen basket, as we saw in that one bee, and collects it in a little box at the bottom. So you put that on for several days, you collect pollen, and then you take it off so that they can continue to get the food that they need. But you can skim off some of that for your own purposes. And like honey, the color changes with the different species of the flowers, and somewhat the taste. It does not a great deal. Beeswax. In ancient times, beeswax was the most valuable product of the honey by far, even more of the hive, even more than honey itself. It was something that was used for religious purposes, for the candles that you see still in cathedrals and some Catholic churches and Russian Orthodox churches, Eastern Orthodox churches. It was used for creating artwork, encaustic paintings. This is a mummy that you can see on the cover piece of a mummy. And it was vital for both the production of sculpture and jewelry with precious minerals, and also for the mortuary practices in ancient Egypt. Another substance that is used that comes from the hive that many people use, particularly for health purposes, propolis. Propolis is called bee glue. It's what bees seal off the inside of their hive with and glue parts together. So because it's antiseptic, and it also seals against wind infiltration and animal infiltration. It's a sticky substance that bees gather from various plant materials. So like honey, it can be very different from season to season and environment to environment. Um, and it also fights pathogens on contact. And the other thing that the bees do with it is a problem in winter areas like our own is mice love beehives because mice can go in there and the bees are clustered and they will be in a warm environment and they also have free access to food. But if it warms up and the bees detect an intruder, what they do is they will kill the mouse by stinging it to death, and then they will encapsulate the body in propolis and mummify it so that it doesn't rot and cause disease within the hive. Propolis was also used as part of a varnish process, particularly in the Renaissance and Middle Ages in the making of fine instruments. Stradivarius was said to use propolis in his instruments to make that contribute that very fine sound. So communication, we know a lot about communication, but there's always more information evolving. In terms of a beekeeper, one thing you need to know is the bees reorient themselves to where they are every morning. They fly out of the hive and you'll see them circle the hive, and that gives them a marker geographically of where they are that they can go back to. They see things more in the ultraviolet light range, so flowers look very different to them. So you can see on this flower, I'm blanking on what kind of flower it is, but you can see there's kind of radial darker lines coming off of the flower that aim out and aim towards the center of the pollen. Under ultraviolet light, those would become much more distinct. So it's like a target for a bee, and they will see that and fly right towards that. They are sensitive to ambient light, just like I think us humans are. And when the light levels start to shrink in the fall, it is a signal to them to retreat into the hive and to complete their preparations for winter. And they're very aware of the changes so that when it starts to get lighter in our environment in February and March, it stimulates their production of bee brood and preparations for the spring, so they can get ready for the spring. Even though they're sealed in a hive, they're very aware of that, and that's somewhat of a mystery. You've probably heard of the bee dance, the waggle dance. This is something that is very well documented. And that's where the bees, foragers, use to communicate to the rest of the hive where honey is. So they can fly out, they know the distance and the angle of the sun, and they can express that through a dance. And the intensity of the dance, how much they waggle, indicates the intensity of the source. So if it's a really strong source, they will waggle more strongly or more intensely than if it is a weaker source. And there also is, because of ongoing research, the idea that there's different dialects of the waggle dance that are specific to certain races of bees and types of bees and environments. But what is perhaps most important of all and very poorly understood uh, are pheromones, scents. Because they're in a dark hive, they're dependent upon the scents to understand what is happening from other bees. And that's something that communicates very quickly through through them. The queen, as I mentioned, produces queenrite. But the worker bees produce over 50 different identifiable pheromones, which individually and in combination mean different things. Um, the one thing you become very aware of as a beekeeper is they have an alarm pheromone. They have a kind of a general alarm pheromone that they produce if they sense that something's wrong. They also have a specific one. The specific one is the one you have to watch out for because when a bee comes at you, and sometimes you're going to get stung, um, a bee will sting you and release a very strong pheromone that when you smell it, smells kind of like overripe bananas or the banana scent of a banana candy. Um, that is a marker for the other bees to say, here's the enemy, sting here. Um, I've had it such that bees are as I mentioned, each hive has an individual personality, and there are some bees, some hives that I've had that I could work all day and not get stung. Others would see me coming at a distance of 50, 60 feet and come at me like a rocket propelled grenade or something, and come right for my and they shoot. I've been stung several times right between the eyes. The last thing I see is a bee coming at me, and then I get a sting right between the eyes, and then it releases pheromone, which attracts other bees. Um, so this is something that it's an interesting part of the bee life, and it's something we're just beginning to understand. Um, so amongst the other things that the bees are doing, and so we won't have the video, but you can see it later when you look at this presentation online. When they swarm, this is this behavior where they stick their butts up in the air and they fan, you will see. This is a behavior that they're spraying a scent, and the scent is saying, this is home. So swarming bees, when they get into a new hive, when they identify the hive, will line up like that, release the pheromone and fan it out and spray it out so that all the bees around will know that happens. That's the place to go. They also have a specific scent for each individual hive. So when a stranger bee attempts to go in, they will know whether it belongs to that hive or not. If it is mistaken and it's just carrying honey or nectar, generally they will let it pass. But if it's a robber bee who is trying to get in there to steal honey, which they do on occasion, they will know from the scent that that is not a welcome guest, and it's an intruder, and they will fight it, sting it, whatever it takes to keep that bee out. If they get too crowded in the hive and they need to swarm, that is another separate scent. So they control not just the individual moment, but the long-term direction through pheromones. So bee swarming is something that is a natural event. It's a bee's way of reproduction that is just as important as individual laying of eggs. Swarming happens because the hive is crowded and they have an opportunity to start a new hive, or the conditions are just are right for one reason or another. And what will happen is you will see the bees start to gather on the landing board like that. They will fly out and then land in a mass, and they will light in that swarm, which you see pictures of. They've landed on a light post, they've landed in someone's car. What they're doing there is those are the bees that are leaving the hive, because swarming almost surgically removes half of the older bees, the younger bees and the old queen, and leave behind the new bees and the young queen. One of those. I'm mixing up which are which, but one queen leaves, one queen stays that's been raised up, and half the bees leave. They light on a branch, and then scout bees go out and find a place for them to be home. At that point, when they were just lighted like that, there's actually a point that you can capture the swarm. You can easily knock down the swarm into an open hive body, and generally they will accept it. There's a video which I'm going the wrong way, which is there. We won't show it today because I can't do that, but you can see it, which shows that swarming behavior and how to capture a swarm. But capturing a swarm is a fairly easy thing to do. bees don't, when they're in a swarm, they have no home to protect. So generally, they are quite docile, and they're just waiting for the word to go as to where to land and where to build a new home. And providing that home through an open hive is one way of doing that. A caution is if the swarm has been there for multiple days and they've eaten off all of their available honey, that's called a dry swarm, and then they are testy and angry. And they will tell you that. If you have them, you can try spraying them with some sugar water to get them to calm them down. But if they're too testy, I advise just leaving them alone. Um, so now we can get to the meat of the matter. So you want to keep bees. So some of the things you need to think about before you commit are space, where you're going to keep the bees, time. Beekeeping has become much more complex in the years since I've taken it up because of various parasites and diseases that you may have read about. They require a lot more time and thought and commitment. In the old days, like the golden old days of everything, you could get the bees out and most of them would survive the winter and minimal intervention. That is no longer true, even for so-called treatment-free bees, beekeeping. Financial commitment, keeping bees is probably about, $700 to $1,000 to get into it. We'll talk a little bit about the specifics of that. Kind of depends upon some different factors. And your desired outcomes. Do you want to do this for your own purposes of pollination and honey? Are you hoping to get into this as a sideline business? Do you just want to do it to observe bees? Each one of those kind of impacts how many bees you'll keep, the expense, and the effort. Um, and philosophy. There's a real split between different schools of thought in keeping bees, and I'll talk a little bit about those. Most beekeepers are kind of like the same folks who do organic gardening. They're not really interested in heavy chemical interventions. And some people are interested in kind of alternative ways of beekeeping. And those are things to think about before you make the investment, and to learn more about as you kind of go down this thing. And finally, very real consideration are bee stings. If you garden, you're going to get punctured by rose thorns or you're going to get sore back. You will get stung by bees. Even if you're wearing a full-on outfit like the guy on the right, sooner or later you get stung. I've gotten stung as little as, 1 or 2 times a season, to a couple of bad seasons where I had some, poor swarm control, and one notable one where I got 60 stings in one sitting. Not recommended for many reasons. But your tolerance to getting stung is important. Your reaction to getting stung, because bees, like other animals, sense human emotions or feelings. So if you panic, they're going to see you as a more ready target. So just something to be prepared for and to think about, particularly if you have health issues. I'll talk about that in a moment. So essentially, in terms of philosophy, there are 3 different schools of thought, broadly speaking. Conventional beekeeping, which is mostly people who practice this are commercial beekeepers who need to keep the numbers of their hives up and kind of produce as much honey or get as many pollination contracts as possible. The other end of that is treatment-free, which I'll talk to in a minute. And the middle ground, which I follow, is intensive management. Keeping a very close eye on your bees, on their health, being in there more than I would have been 20 years ago to understand the current state of health and dealing with a health issue of a bee prior to it getting out of control. So we'll talk a bit about that. But I want to point out that hive on the right is called I'm blanking on the name now. It's a long-bodied hive that it was developed a few years ago, and the purpose of it is it mimics a more natural arrangements for the bees, but it doesn't have you have to replace the comb every year. or to get the honey out because it doesn't have the movable frames that a conventional hive has. Some people experience great success with this. Others do not because it's an unflexible system to work. But there's a belief that it's more healthy for the bees themselves. So treatment-free, you'll hear a lot about treatment-free. Treatment-free does not equal management-free. And it's like, organic gardening. Organic gardening is probably twice as labor-intensive as non-organic, conventional gardening, uh, because you have to very carefully think about and evaluate your steps much more than conventional beekeeping. Conventional beekeeping, you have a disease, you throw a chemical at it. The chemical doesn't last for too long because the bees develop a resistance, so you have to keep changing the chemicals, et cetera, et cetera. But it's much quicker than um, uh, treatment-free beekeeping. When you establish the hive, you should look for genetics that are resistant to the mites and parasites and diseases. So you're getting a more carefully bred genetic package in those bees, which may end up being less honey production or less vigorous pollination or other trade-offs, but you're doing it for the health of the hive. You also have to go into the hive frequently to pull samples to check for Varroa. Varroa we'll talk about more in a moment. That's been a watershed event in beekeeping history. But you need to make this decision early on because too often, very often, I've talked to beekeepers who say something akin to, I believe in the natural intelligence of bees, and bees can figure out how to, fight disease or adapt to their own situation. Well, that's great, except for the fact that evolution is a hard master. And almost universally, those people lose their hives because there are so many diseases that affect bees, and you have to take that into consideration. If you're willing to buy new bees every year, you can go for that. I personally, want to keep bees over generations. And there's also realization that honeybees have kind of co-evolved with humans. Honeybees are one of the longest lived or they have the longest history of management, of domesticating them. They don't recognize you necessarily by an individual, but they've been associated with human beings since the very early ages, the Egyptian times and earlier. So if we're going to keep bees, in my opinion, you need to figure out how to manage them, even if you don't want to use harsh chemicals. So some of the things to do, this is so that's the Varroa, that's the devil we know in beekeeping. The Varroa was introduced into North America probably in the 70s or 80s, but really became a problem in the 90s and early 2000s. This is a parasite that is attracted to larvae, and it lays its eggs in the honeycomb, and then will attack both the larval form and the adult form of bees and deplete their energy reserves, and eventually will kill off the colony if not treated or managed. One of the reasons being that bees, Western honeybees, Apis mellifera, evolved without this pest and naturally have no resistance. So one thing that has been very promising is developing a race of bees that are called hygienic because they detect the bees on the Varroa on each other's bodies and pull them off and bite them and kill them. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for in terms of genetics. There are various management techniques, such as brood breaks, because the mites are attracted to the larva. If you stop the queen from laying for 2 weeks in the summer by caging her, sticking her in a cage in the hive, that produces a break in the larval population, and the drones die out. Similarly, the mites have a preference for drone brood. So you can put in a comb that is slightly larger and it will stimulate the queen to lay drone eggs in there. So she can lay the drone eggs. The mites flock to that that particular frame. The trick is you have to time it extremely carefully, because if you wait until if you don't remove them at the proper time, I think it's 21 days, um, all those drones will hatch out and they'll be full of mites. And also, being drones, they all need to be fed and aren't capable of feeding themselves, so they will be a drag on the population. So I'm going to give you some resources at the end that you can learn more about these, because it's more than I can get into at this time. But you do need to anticipate management of diseases and pests, particularly varroa. So what will it cost? What's the breakdown? Tools and supplies are, somewhere between $500 and $1,000 for new. You want to get 1 to 2. You really want to start with 2 hives. I recommend starting with 2 hives rather than one, because that gives you much more flexibility. If you have problems with 1 hive and you lose it, you're out of beekeeping. If you have another one, it's a reserve, and also you can do management techniques where you can combine 2 hives if one's weak into another, so you get that extra boost and you're not at a total loss. And then if they grow out, you can then split them. Much more flexibility in terms of management. You'll also need smokers and hive tools. Hive tool, it's right down there to the bottom of the hive. That red, it's like a pry bar that you get in a hardware store, and a bee brush, a soft brush for brushing off bees as you work them. All the kind of general things. I have a specific caution against buying used. You might be tempted to go in Facebook Marketplace and buy used hives, because there's so many diseases, many of which hide or go dormant in the beeswax itself. You may be buying problems in by doing that. So be very careful if you get used equipment. Never use the frames over again unless you know it comes from a clean hive. Sterilize the inside of the hive by burning it with a propane torch, but generally best to avoid used. It's worth the investment and the peace of mind for new. In terms of beekeeping, Stacey, I have to put this out there. You should know your own tolerance for bee stings. If you have any serious allergies, you might want to check with your doctor. I keep EpiPens around just because I don't have an allergic problem, but in case I have guests over and something happens. Generally, the only effect you'll have from bee stings are a large swollen red area that gets incredibly itchy. But if you have anything other than localized reaction, you might want to think twice about beekeeping. So what you need for space. The bee hives on the right are my hives. The ones on the left are another near here. You want them out, kind of the edge of a tree line, or an edge is a good place for them to be. They don't want to be in deep shade. You want plenty of room to work around them, because particularly in the backside, you don't want to work bees from the front, because you'll be in the way of their flight line. So develop an apiary where they can be accessible from the rear for working them. You have a good access to them. This is right, and the shed is right around the corner where I keep all their supplies. Another thing to worry about in today's world is actually bee colony theft is an issue. I knew a bee company supply that had a whole tractor trailer load of bees stolen because they become quite valuable. If we're talking about several $100s for an individual hive, that is a potential target for theft. So keep that in mind. And the other space you need some storage. I have a shed. I keep my beekeeping equipment, the extra hive bodies and things like that in the corner of the shed, but you'll need to identify where that is. Bees will find excess honey, so you want to have it so you can close the door and keep the bees out. Otherwise, you'll be fighting bees in your shed or garage all season long. And if there are other people in the house who aren't so appreciative of bees, you'll start to hear the complaints. If you're in town, you want to consider your neighbors. I don't know of any particular ordinance against keeping bees in villages. I've kept bees. I lived in Burlington, Vermont. I kept them in my backyard. And generally, people didn't notice them until one very hot, dry summer day. My neighbor came over and started complaining about all the bees in his pool because they were looking for water. And then he saw my beehives, and he was okay with it, but I had to then supply water for the bees. So keep in mind the bees' needs as you do, as you think about that. So sunny location, natural windbreak to protect the hive in winter is good. Source of water. If you live in a rural area and there's farmland near you, you want to be careful about potential pesticide. Do they spray? Um, be a good neighbor, child-proof, animal-resistant, not visible from the road, so that you don't have to worry about theft. Beekeeping safety, in addition to the EpiPen issue, depending upon your tolerance for bee stings, you can do more or less clothing. I just simply use a bee jacket, which is a jacket that incorporates a hood, a mesh hood. And I only put up the hood if they're in a bad mood. I do have gloves, and if I have to deal with a hive that's very angry, I will do the gloves, and I'll also get duct tape and tape up my wear boots and tape up the boot leg pant interface, because bees are very adept at finding cracks in your your safety veil. And the worst experience is if you don't cinch up your veil or you don't zip it up. Occasionally, the bees will find their way into the veil, and you're suddenly looking at a bee 2 inches off your face, an angry bee at you. So keep that in mind. Uh, when you're working with bees, people are naturally interested in it. Keep them away. You don't have to keep them miles away, but 50, 75 feet is good where they can watch from a distance. Um, and keep in mind, if the temperament of the bees, because it will change day by day. Generally, bees prefer to be worked when it's warm and sunny. They like warm and sunny. If it's a cold, rainy day and they can't fly, they will be testy and angry, and you should prepare accordingly. So where do you get honeybees? Honeybees generally come in two forms. A package bee is the box on the left. So if you order what's called a package, those are currently going for about $125 and up. And they are raised by bee farms, which are producing masses of bees. And what they do is they take the bees and they shake them into a giant cone. And each one of these packages is about 5 pounds. And then they have queens that they're raising separately that are in a small cage that they go in the top under that piece of thin plywood on the center. So they're separate and they become an artificial swarm. Initially, the bees would not tolerate having a strange queen amongst them, but by the time the bees travel generally from the deep south here up several days, they've gotten used to the queen, and they have accepted her as their own. The other method that's far preferable are the nukes. A nuke is a nucleus hive. You can see one on the right. They come in small specialized boxes. They're 5 full frames. The queen is already integrated amongst them. So they are used to being together, and they are starting to function as an integral hive. She's laid eggs, so they will be new bees hatching out. And generally those come from local sources. So they are adapted to this region. A nucleus, a hive, costs between 175 and 200 and sometimes more. But it's worth the investment at this point. Sometimes you can catch a swarm. So that's what the person on the left there is doing. If you have extra equipment, I recommend leaving a hive body set up with all the frames ready to go. Swarm season starts in mid-May and goes through the first 2 weeks of July. That's where you'll see the most. That's when they are at a population peak and they will be flying out. Past the middle of July, every week past that becomes more problematic for capturing swarms, because they will have a harder and harder time capturing enough nutrition to get through the winter. So I don't recommend even bothering with a swarm past mid-July. Never into August. I just let them go and make their own way. The other way, the final way, is removing bees from a structure. It's a great thing to do if you're a carpenter. You have to cut into the structure. I personally won't do it because it requires, cutting into people's homes. But there you could, and this is something you should charge money for, because people need to get bees out of their houses, and it's a real skill and technique to do that. So going through the beekeeper's year, Right now, we're about to come into spring. You check on your overwintered colonies. If they're looking thin, if they're looking, there's not enough honey left, you feed them sugar water. Sugar water is mixed up at a rate of from a third to a half sugar, just powdered, it's just regular sugar that you get from the supermarket into very hot water, not quite boiling, mix it up. It melts quickly, and that's a syrup that once it cools can be given to the bees and they will take readily. So you monitor them. Once the spring bloom is in full swing, when the dandelions are out, stop feeding them and just start monitoring for overcrowding and super up, add supers as needed. In the summer, you continue to monitor the blooms coming in out of season. It's good to keep a record of it because each location tends to be a little bit different than the next. Um, you check on them regularly, look for problems. We'll talk about problems in a moment. We talked about working them on sunny days. And what are you doing in summer? What are you actually looking for? These are two examples of two hive frames that you might pull out. The hive on the left, the frame on the left, has been almost fully laid with brood. So that's all baby bees in there. That's a very good pattern. That's a healthy hive. The frame on the right, it's very spotty. That queen is failing. So if you see what you're seeing on the right, you're going to have to replace that queen, or the hive is at risk of dying out. Even worse than the queen dying out is what you see on the left. You notice that all of the cells are raised. That means that's all drone brood. And what has happened is the queen has failed to the point where she is dead or as good as dead, and her pheromone or queen rightness is lost, and the queen has stopped laying. So the workers in that condition start to develop their sexual organs, but they have not mated and cannot mate. So they lay eggs, and because of the nature of their biology, all the eggs they lay will be male. And when you see this hive is gone. You might as well euthanize it. There's no going back because it can't. The hive won't survive, and there's no way of reintroducing a queen because you now have 1,000 different queens. On the right, this is a hive that's just undergoing supersedure. You see those peanut-looking cells; those are queen cells, and you can see that the topmost one, is open at the bottom. That means that she has hatched out. One of the queens has hatched out, and what the queens do, the bees will lay several different half dozen queens, and the first one out goes and finds the other queen cells and stings them to death, so that she doesn't have competition for the hive. Also, we have to worry about external pests. In this part of the world, bears are a real issue. And bears will come back to a apiary once they know that bees, and they're not even eating the honey, despite Winnie the Pooh. What they're going after is the brood, those frames with the full pack brood, because that's protein, that's a rich food source for them, and they will rip everything apart and destroy it, such as you see on the left. That's happened to me a couple of times. Or more insidiously, you'll find that the hive is suddenly very angry. You can't work with them. Their numbers are depleting, and you see scratches on the front of the hive. And what is happening, this happens with both skunks and raccoons, is they also like to eat bees. And what they've learned is a beehive can be a bee vending machine. They go and they scratch or bang on that front of the hive. The bees come out to defend themselves, and the skunk just starts eating them as they come out, or the raccoon or whatever. And then the hive depletes. It becomes very difficult to work with. So with both of these, we recommend poultry fencing. Electric fencing is very effective at keeping these pests out. Bee diseases, and we talked a little bit about them, but what you're looking out for are particularly Varroa. This is adult bee we've seen larva. This is an adult bee, but you're also looking out for your American European foul brood, etc. There are resources at the end of this presentation. You can kind of learn more about bee diseases. You don't need to immerse yourself in there right away. And then finally, you prepare for harvest in the fall. These are my hives. You want to make sure they have enough honey to get through the winter. The supers on top, the smaller boxes are surplus honey, and you want to make sure the bees get through the winter with about 70 to 90 pounds of honey so that they are not stressed for food. And you want to make sure the bees are within those brood boxes. Then you separate them, the bees from the supers. You can either pull them off and with a leaf blower blow the bees out, or have what's called a bee escape, which is that unfinished painted board there. A bee escape is a device that you put between two levels of bees, and it's a one-way valve, so the bees can go down into the hive, which they want to do in the night to cluster and keep warm, but they can't get back up. And then finally, harvesting honey. Uh, Harvesting honey, the extractor is a pretty big expense. Buying US made commercial equipment is like $1,000 or $2,000. I have to say, I hate to recommend it, but Amazon has introduced a whole line of extracting equipment, which is extremely reasonably priced. It obviously it's imported. And I have to say, I have one and it works fine. But that you can do for $200 or $300. I don't think it would hold up to, a big operation, but for a homeowner or a sideliner, it works just fine. And then finally, winter time. You want to shelter your bees. They don't really need to be indoors. They don't want to be indoors. They want to be in the environment. And that can include wrapping the hive with the tar paper that you see here. I do something similar to this I put straw bales around the windward side, so it gives them a shelter from the wind. By the way, this is a photograph of Martha Stewart's apiary in Connecticut, which I found online. But you want to make sure that, again, access is important, so you can shovel out the hive so they don't get buried in snow and get asphyxiated, and that you can check on them. So in the winter, the other thing is you look outside. Sometimes you can see these hives. You can see that the snow is melted away from them, and that's because bees are awake and conscious all winter long, and they are in a bee ball in the center of the hive, and they're eating honey and metabolizing it, which keeps the center of that bee ball where the queen is at about 95 degrees all winter long. And that warmth gets out of the hive and performs that melting. You can see sometimes outside of a hive, yellow snow and the spray of dead bees. That actually is a healthy sign. The yellow snow is they wait to defecate until warm days. They fly out and do that and go back, do their business. And they also bring dead bees out so that they don't have to live with them. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go because we're over time here. Just to note that honey is one of 3 of the most adulterated products on the market. When you buy honey in the supermarket, you should be aware that, like the honey on the left there, product of Argentina, Ukraine, and Vietnam, that means it's been transshipped. And what that means is it's probably like mostly not honey. It's some other form of honey. The middle honey is German, and it's the European Union has a very strong food laws, and that is from a guaranteed source. And the honey on the right is local honey. Kutix is a very well-known beekeeper down in Chenango County. So if you want to support bees, buy local honey, produce your own local honey. Why is it adulterated? Simple matter of economics. Syrup is produced, sugar syrup is produced in China that is 50 cents a dollar per pound maximum retail. And you can buy it by the container load, shipping container load, and convert it to supermarket honey that retails for, and this was last year, it's probably much more now, $7.20 a pound. Also, local honey from beekeepers ranges from in various health food stores, the farmers market, between $8.40 a pound to $12 a pound, and specialty honey can go to $14 a pound or even more for more exotic honeys. So people ask about organic honey. The rules of organic farming are quite strict, and because bees fly in a 5-mile radius, you would have to be able to prove that every part of that 5-mile radius is managed organically, which is virtually impossible in the mainland of the United States. So certifiable organic honey really comes only from two places: the Brazilian rainforest, where they are isolated in vast tracts of the rainforest, or Hawaii, on islands of Hawaii they're able to prove that. What is more common in this area is raw honey, which is minimally processed and filtered so that it retains the natural elements like pollen and bee enzymes. It does crystallize, as you see here. In Europe, that's considered an advantage. It's called creamed honey. Here, people don't quite understand it. You can easily liquefy it by immersing it in warm water, um, but it is a sign of genuine honey. The fake honey never crystallizes. It's always liquid. Wax, I'm going to kind of go through this because we're kind of running out of time. Honey is used for health purposes. Seasonal allergy people buy it to take a teaspoonful a day to inoculate themselves against local allergenic substances. In third world countries, it's used as a topical antiseptic because honey is naturally antiseptic, and it's approved by the WHO. So I need to close up. Beekeeping supplies. These are three national producers that do a lot of business in upstate New York. Better Bee, their home place is outside of Saratoga, east of Saratoga in Greenwich, New York. Kutix mentioned about their honey, but they also sell beekeeping supplies, and they are south of Norwich in Chenango County. Man Lake doesn't have a physical presence, but they ship regularly into our area, and I think they have a store in northern Pennsylvania somewhere. But all these, I recommend going online, looking at their catalogs because they're tremendously informative. They're also sources for bees. So if you want to buy bees, these are places. I would caution you, if you're thinking of doing it this year, put your orders in now because it's been a bad winter, so bees are going to be in short supply. How do you learn more? I highly recommend joining the local beekeeping club. Here in the Mohawk Valley, the Mid-York Beekeeping Association is run out of CC Oneida in Oneida County. They have meetings there monthly. Leatherstocking Beekeeper Association has meetings in Cooperstown. And the Southern Adirondack Beekeepers, for those on the eastern side, they're a very, very active group. In fact, they're having a big conference this weekend that you can learn about by going to their website. In terms of research-based, University of Guelph YouTube channel is phenomenal for looking through each of the processes. Cornell University, the Pollinator Network is great for New York State things, and Honeybee Health Coalition is good for the learning more about health issues. Podcasts are a great way to learn. These are all three good ones. I just want to stop with, I started with the strange old man, of which I count myself as one. And beekeeping today is in the hands of a new generation of people who are doing some great research. The Cornell Dice Lab is on the lower left. That middle group is the Penn State Beekeeping Lab. Researchers also doing great work on figuring out how to keep bees healthily. And also we're doing things that we never did before, like keeping bees in urban areas. So we'll stop with that, and I'll take any questions.
No, there are no questions in the chat.
Okay.
So, but if does anybody have a question? Feel free to unmute and ask. I actually have a question for you, Garrett. You said when one of the queens hatches, she then goes and stings the others to death. Do
Yes.
bees not die after they sting once?
So a worker bee, when she stings you, has a stinger that looks like a fish hook. It has barbs on it. And when it stings you, it gets stuck in your flesh. And when she pulls it out, it disembowels her, so she dies. A queen has a stinger, but it's smooth. So when it goes into the other queen cell, it doesn't get stuck.
Okay. So yes, and still no other questions in the chat. So everybody, you will receive another email from me tomorrow with the link to our YouTube channel. We will upload this recording to our YouTube channel so you can review it, and we will try to include as many of the links right in the email so you can click on them to the videos and stuff.
Okay, thank you. And good night.